The parchment crackled in Samuel Thornton's weathered hands as he stood on the overgrown path, leading to what was now, impossibly, his property, a homestead he had won in a card game from a man too drunk to know better and too desperate to care. The deed listed everything: 40 acres of workable land, a stone cottage with a thatched roof, a barn that leaned slightly westward, 3 milk cows, assorted chickens, and one orc girl named Kara, age 19, who came with the land as indentured property. Samuel read that line 3 times, his stomach turning with each pass, before he folded the deed and shoved it into his coat pocket, determined to see this through even though every instinct told him to turn around and ride back to the coastal town, where he had spent the last decade working other men's fields for pennies. The cottage appeared around a bend in the path, exactly as ramshackle as he had expected, with wildflowers growing against the foundation and ivy creeping up the chimney. The barn door hung open, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze, and from somewhere behind the structure came the rhythmic sound of an axe biting into wood. Samuel adjusted the pack on his shoulders and followed the sound, his boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been properly maintained in what looked like years. When he rounded the corner of the barn, he stopped short. She was tall, easily matching his own 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms that flexed with corded muscle as she brought the axe down in a perfect arc, splitting a log cleanly in 2. Her skin was the color of summer grass, a vibrant green that seemed to glow in the golden light of late afternoon, and her black hair hung in a thick braid down her back, bits of bark and sawdust clinging to the strands. She wore a simple, undyed tunic and trousers that had been patched so many times they resembled a quilt, and when she bent to stack the split wood, Samuel caught sight of the iron collar around her neck, dull gray metal that had worn the skin beneath it to calluses. She must have sensed his presence because she straightened abruptly, turning to face him with the axe still in her hands. Her eyes were amber, bright and wary, and her small tusks jutted up from her lower jaw, giving her words a slight lisp when she spoke. "You must be the new owner." Thomas mentioned he had lost the land in a game. Her voice was flat, resigned, as though she had been through this transaction before and expected nothing good from it. Samuel cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how dry his mouth had become. "Samuel Thornton, and you must be Kara." "I am." She set the axe down carefully, leaning it against the chopping block, and brushed her hands on her trousers. "The cows have been milked. The chickens are fed. There is stew on the stove if you are hungry. The master bedroom is upstairs, though the roof leaks in heavy rain. I sleep in the barn." She recited it all like a list she had memorized, her gaze fixed somewhere past his left shoulder. "Right." Samuel shifted his weight, uncomfortable under the weight of her careful neutrality. "Listen, about what it says on the deed. I understand my position," Kara interrupted, and there was something sharp in her tone now, defensive. "I will work the land as I have been. I will not cause trouble. Thomas found me satisfactory for 6 years. I can only hope you will as well." "That is not what I meant." Samuel pulled the deed from his pocket and unfolded it, scanning the lines until he found the section that made his blood boil. "This part here, where it says you come with the land as property, that is not legal. People cannot be property." Kara's expression shifted, confusion flickering across her features. "Orcs can be." In the Treaty of Greystone, it was decided that orcs captured during the border conflicts could be claimed as indentured servants for a period of no less than 10 years or until their debt was paid. "Treaty of Greystone was overturned 4 years ago," Samuel said quietly, watching her face carefully. "King issued a decree. No sentient being can be held as property regardless of species. Anyone still held under those old indentures was supposed to be freed." The silence that followed was so complete Samuel could hear the wind rustling through the wheat field behind them. Kara stared at him, her amber eyes wide and disbelieving. "Thomas never said," she stopped, swallowed hard. "He told me I had 6 more years to serve. He lied." Samuel's hands tightened on the deed, crumpling the edges. "Or he never checked. Either way, you should have been freed years ago." He looked down at the parchment, at the careful script that assigned a person a value like livestock, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I am going to sign you free, today. Right now, you will not be bound to this land or to me." Kara took a step backward, her hand coming up to touch the collar at her throat. "Why would you do that? You just got here. You do not know me. I could be dangerous. I could steal from you or burn the fields or... Are you planning to do any of those things?" "No. But then I do not see the problem." Samuel looked around, spotted a flat rock near the woodpile, and walked over to it, kneeling to spread the deed out on its surface. He pulled a small bottle of ink and a quill from his pack, items he had brought specifically for signing ownership documents, and found the section at the bottom reserved for transfer of indentured persons. In careful letters he wrote, "Kara, Orc woman, age 19, is hereby released from all claims of indenture effective immediately and is recognized as a free person under the laws of the kingdom. Signed, Samuel Thornton, this 15th day of August." He dated it, signed his name with a flourish, and stood up, holding the deed out to her. "There, it is done." Kara stared at the parchment like it might bite her. She made no move to take it. "I do not understand. What do you want from me?" "Nothing." Samuel kept his hand extended. "You are free. You can stay or go. That is your choice now." "Where would I go?" The question came out raw, almost angry. "My clan cast me out when I was captured. They said I had shamed them by being taken alive. I have no family, no home. This land is all I have known for 6 years." She looked at the cottage, at the fields, at the barn with its crooked door. "If I leave, I will have nothing." Samuel lowered the deed slowly, understanding dawning. "Then stay. Not as property, but as a partner. I need help working this land. I am a decent farmer, but I have never run my own place before. You know the soil, the animals, what works and what does not. We could split the profits. Equal shares. You want to go into business with an orc?" Kara's laugh was bitter. "The townspeople will never trade with you. They will call you a sympathizer or worse. You will be ruined before the first harvest. Let me worry about that." Samuel folded the deed carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. "Right now, I am more concerned about that roof leak you mentioned, and whether there is enough of that stew for 2. Kara studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for some sign of deception or hidden motive. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded, a small, cautious movement. "There is enough stew, and I know where Thomas kept the spare thatch for roof repairs. We will need to fix it before the autumn rains start. Then we had better get to work." Samuel extended his hand, the gesture feeling suddenly important, a bridge across a chasm neither of them had chosen but both had to navigate. "Partners." Kara looked at his hand, then at his face, and slowly, carefully, she reached out and clasped it. Her grip was strong, her palm rough with calluses. "Partners," she agreed, and for the first time since he had arrived, something like hope flickered in her expression. The stew was thick with root vegetables and surprisingly well seasoned, and they ate it sitting at a rough wooden table in the cottage's main room while the evening light faded to purple through the small windows. Samuel learned that Kara had been captured during a raid when she was 13, too young to fight effectively, but old enough to be bound by the treaty. Thomas, the previous owner, had purchased her indenture from a merchant who specialized in such transactions. paying 30 silver coins for 10 years of labor. She had learned to cook, to tend animals, to plant and harvest, to mend fences and thatch roofs, all while wearing the iron collar that marked her as property. Thomas was not cruel, Kara said, scraping the last of her stew from the bowl. He did not beat me or starve me. But he was not kind either. I was a tool to him, no different than the plow or the scythe. When he lost the land gambling, I think he was almost relieved, one less thing to worry about. Did he ever mention the decree? Samuel asked. The one that freed indentured orcs? Never. But I could not read until 2 years ago when a traveling priest stayed in the barn during a storm. He taught me letters in exchange for meals. Kara touched the collar at her throat again, a habitual gesture. I never thought to ask about laws. I assumed my servitude was just and legal. Well, it is not. Not anymore. Samuel stood and began clearing the bowls, carrying them to the wash basin by the door. Tomorrow, we need to find a blacksmith who can remove that collar. Kara's hand went to the iron band, her fingers tracing its edge. The nearest blacksmith is in Millhaven, 8 miles south. He may not be willing to help an orc. Then we will find one who will. Samuel poured water from a pitcher into the basin and began washing the bowls, his movements efficient and practiced. You should not have to wear that thing a moment longer than necessary. Samuel, Kara's voice was soft, uncertain. Why are you being kind to me? Truly, there must be a reason. He paused, his hand still in the soapy water, and considered his answer carefully. My mother was Gallian. She came to this kingdom when she married my father, and people treated her like she was less than human because she spoke with an accent and worshipped different gods. I watched her spend 20 years trying to prove she belonged, trying to be accepted, and she died still being called the foreigner by our neighbors. He pulled his hands from the water and dried them on a cloth. I swore I would never treat someone as less than a person just because they were different, and I meant it. Kara was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Your mother raised a good son. She tried her best. Samuel hung the cloth on a hook and turned to face her. Get some rest. Tomorrow we have a roof to fix and a blacksmith to convince. That night, Samuel lay in the master bedroom on a mattress that smelled of mildew and old straw, listening to the wind whistle through gaps in the walls and thinking about the choices that had led him here. He had spent 10 years saving every copper, dreaming of land of his own. And now he had it through the sheer luck of being in the right tavern when a desperate man made a terrible bet. He should have felt triumphant, but instead, all he could think about was the expression on Kara's face when he had signed the deed, that fragile, disbelieving hope that had made her look younger, more vulnerable. In the barn, Kara lay in the hayloft where she had slept for 6 years, the straw molded to the shape of her body from countless nights. She touched the collar again, tracing the seam where it had been riveted closed, and allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to have it removed, to stand under the sky without that weight around her neck. She had stopped dreaming of freedom years ago, had accepted her fate as immutable, but now this strange human man had walked into her life and upended everything with a few strokes of a quill. She did not know whether to trust it, whether to trust him, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than resignation. Morning came with roosters crowing and cows lowing to be milked, and Samuel woke to find Kara already moving through the morning chores with practiced efficiency. He joined her in the barn, learning the names of the cows Daisy, Clover, and Buttercup, and the particular way each one preferred to be milked. Kara was a patient teacher, correcting his grip without mockery, showing him how to coax the most milk with the least stress to the animals. Thomas never helped with the milking, she said as she moved to Clover, her hands working in a steady rhythm. "He said it was servant's work." "Thomas sounds like he was an ass," Samuel replied, and was rewarded with a startled laugh from Kara, bright and genuine. "He was," she agreed, and there was a lightness in her voice that had not been there the day before. They worked through the morning, repairing a section of fence that had begun to rot, checking the vegetable garden for weeds, and taking inventory of the supplies in the cottage's small pantry. Samuel was impressed by how well Kara had maintained everything, despite being alone for what she admitted had been nearly a month after Thomas left. "He told me he would be back in 3 days," she said as she pulled carrots from the garden, shaking dirt from their roots. "But days turned to weeks. I assumed he had died or decided to abandon the land. Either way, I kept working. There was nothing else to do." "You could have left," Samuel pointed out, accepting the carrots and placing them in a basket. "And gone where? To do what?" Kara moved to the next row, her movements efficient. "At least here I had food and shelter. Out there, I would have been a runaway orc, subject to capture and re-indenture or worse." The words hung heavy between them, a reminder of how precarious her existence had been. Samuel found himself growing angry on her behalf, at a system that had failed her so completely, at a man who had kept her in bondage even after it was illegal, at a world that saw her as something less than human. After a simple lunch of bread and cheese, they set out for Millhaven, walking the 8 miles in companionable silence broken occasionally by Kara pointing out landmarks, a lightning-struck oak that marked the boundary with the neighboring farm, a stream where she sometimes caught fish, a meadow where wild mint grew in abundance. The day was warm but not oppressively so, and the walk gave Samuel time to appreciate the land he now owned. The rolling hills covered in late summer green, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. Millhaven was larger than he had expected, a proper market town with cobbled streets and shops with painted signs. People stopped to stare as they passed, their gazes locking onto Kara with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. A woman pulled her child closer, whispering something that made the boy's eyes go wide. A merchant spat on the ground as they walked by his stall. Kara kept her head down, her shoulders hunched as though trying to make herself smaller, and Samuel felt his anger kindle hotter. The blacksmith's forge was at the edge of town, a large open-fronted building where the heat rolled out in waves and the clang of hammer on anvil rang like a bell. The blacksmith himself was a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that reached his chest. He looked up as they approached, his gaze moving from Samuel to Kara and back again. "Help you?" he asked, his tone neutral but wary. "I need that collar removed," Samuel said, gesturing to Kara. "She has been freed from indenture, and there is no reason for her to keep wearing it." The blacksmith set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his apron, studying Kara with narrowed eyes. "That is an indenture collar. Removing those without proper documentation is illegal. I have the documentation right here." Samuel pulled the deed from his pocket and unfolded it, pointing to the section where he had written Kara's release. "Signed and dated. Everything is legal." The blacksmith took the deed and read it slowly, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the words. When he finished, he handed it back and shook his head. "That may be legal on paper, but I am not touching it. Do you know what people would say if they saw me helping an orc? I would lose half my business." "Then you would lose customers who do not deserve your work," Samuel said, his voice hard. "The law says she is free. That collar is a symbol of bondage she should not have to wear. The law also says I have the right to refuse service," the blacksmith countered, "and I am refusing. Now get out of my forge before I call the constable." Samuel felt Kara's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure. "It is fine," she said quietly. "We can try somewhere else." "No, it is not fine." But Samuel allowed himself to be led away, back onto the street where the stairs followed them like flies. They tried 2 more blacksmiths in town, and both refused for similar reasons. By the time they started the walk back to the homestead, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, and Kara's earlier hopefulness had faded back into resigned acceptance. "I told you," she said as they walked. "No one will help an orc, not for any amount of money or documentation." "Then I will figure out how to do it myself," Samuel said stubbornly. "I am not letting you keep wearing that thing." "Samuel, you are not a blacksmith. You could hurt me if you do not know what you are doing." "Then I will learn." He looked at her, at the way the iron had rubbed her skin raw in places despite the calluses. "You deserve to be free of it, Kara, truly free, not just on paper." She met his gaze and something passed between them, some understanding that went deeper than words. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trying." They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, less companionable and more weighted with things unsaid. When they reached the homestead, Samuel went immediately to the barn and began searching through Thomas's old tools and supplies. He found a small selection of metalworking implements, files, chisels, a few hammers of varying sizes, and carried them back to the cottage. "I am not going to try to break it," he said when Kara looked at him with alarm. "But maybe I can file through the rivet. It will take time, but it should be safer than trying to cut it." "It is iron," Kara said. "It will take more than time. It could take weeks." "Then it takes weeks." Samuel set the tools on the table and selected the finest file, testing its edge with his thumb. "I have nothing but time." And so began a new evening routine. After supper, they would sit at the table with a lamp burning between them, and Samuel would work at the collar, filing slowly and carefully at the rivet that held it closed. Kara would sit very still, her hands folded in her lap, sometimes talking to fill the silence, sometimes just watching the moths dance around the lamplight. She told him about her childhood in the clan, about learning to hunt and track, about the stories her mother used to tell of the old gods who shaped the mountains from clay. Samuel told her about growing up in a coastal village, about his father's fishing boat and the storms that had eventually claimed it, about his mother's garden where she grew herbs that reminded her of home. On the 4th night of filing, Kara asked, "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught Samuel off guard, and he paused in his work. "Once. A girl named Helena. We were going to marry, but her father did not approve of me, said I had no prospects. He married her off to a merchant's son instead." He resumed filing, the rasp of metal on metal filling the quiet. "That was 8 years ago. I have not thought about her in a long time. Do you want to marry someday? Maybe. If I find the right person." He glanced up at her, found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "What about you? Orcs do not marry the way humans do." "We take mates, usually during the autumn gathering when the clans meet to trade and feast. But I will never attend another gathering. I am cast out, clanless." She said it matter-of-factly, but Samuel could hear the pain underneath. "So I suppose I will never take a mate." "That seems like a lonely way to live." "It is the only way I have." Kara touched his hand lightly, stilling the file. "But it is less lonely now than it was a week ago." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the lamp or the summer night. He cleared his throat and went back to filing, but he was acutely aware of Kara's presence, of the way her fingers had felt against his skin, of the trust it took for her to sit still while he worked a file against her throat. The wheat was ready for harvesting in early September, and they worked from dawn until dusk cutting and bundling the stalks, their hands blistering and their backs aching. Samuel had hired 2-day laborers from Millhaven, young men who needed the coin and were willing to work alongside an orc if it meant a decent wage. They were not friendly, but they were not hostile either, and Samuel counted that as a small victory. On the 3rd day of harvest, one of the laborers, a gangly youth named Peter, asked Kara how long she had been working the land. 6 years, Kara replied, tying off a bundle with practiced hands. That is a long time. You must know every inch of this place. I do. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. The south field floods in heavy rain. The north field has the best soil for wheat. The east field is good for root vegetables but needs to rest next year. Peter nodded, absorbing this information with the seriousness of someone who aspired to farm his own land someday. My da says orcs do not make good farmers, says you are too warlike. Your da has never met a farmer orc then, Kara said without rancor. We are like anyone else. We do what we must to survive. Peter considered this, then shrugged and went back to work. It was not acceptance exactly, but it was not rejection either, and Samuel saw Kara's shoulders relax slightly, as though a weight she had been carrying had shifted. That evening, after the laborers had gone home and the day's harvest had been stored in the barn, Samuel and Kara collapsed at the kitchen table with cups of cold cider and a loaf of bread Kara had baked that morning. Samuel's hands were so blistered he could barely hold the cup, and Kara's arms trembled with exhaustion, but there was satisfaction in the weariness, the knowledge of work well done. Another week and we will have it all in, Samuel said, tearing off a piece of bread and chewing slowly. Thomas did well with the planting. The yield is better than I expected. He was a good farmer, even if he was not a good man, Kara said. He taught me well, at least. You are a better farmer than he ever was, Samuel said and meant it. He had seen the way she moved through the work, the instinctive understanding of the land and its needs. I am lucky to have you as a partner. Kara ducked her head, but not before he saw the pleasure in her expression. You are easy to work with. You do not bark orders or complain when things are hard. Thomas was always finding fault, always criticizing. Life is too short to spend it being miserable, Samuel said. He reached for the file they kept on the table now and gestured for her to lean closer. She did, tilting her head to give him better access to the rivet, and he began the slow, patient work of filing. They had made progress. The rivet was noticeably thinner than it had been, but there was still a ways to go. Samuel, Kara said after a while, her voice quiet. What will you do when the collar is off? Will you want me to leave? The question made him pause mid-stroke. Why would I want that? Because I will be truly free then. No obligation to stay, no symbol binding me to this place. You might prefer to hire someone else, someone who is not an orc. Kara, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I do not want you to leave. I told you we are partners. That has not changed and will not change when the collar comes off. If anything, I will feel better knowing you are staying because you want to, not because you feel you have no other choice. I do want to stay, she said, and there was something fierce in her voice, almost desperate. I know it has only been a few weeks, but this feels more like home now than it ever did before. You treat me like a person, Samuel, like I matter. Do you know how rare that is? You do matter. The words came out more intense than he intended, and he saw her eyes widen slightly. He forced himself to take a breath to gentle his tone. You matter to this farm and you matter to me. I do not know what I would do without you. Kara reached up slowly, her hand covering his where it held the file against her collar. You matter to me too, she said, more than I know how to say. They stayed like that for a moment, hands touching, gazes locked, and Samuel felt the air between them grow charged with something he was not quite ready to name. Then Kara pulled back, breaking the contact, and he resumed filing, though his heart was beating faster than the work warranted. The harvest was completed by mid-September, and Samuel and Kara loaded 3 wagon loads of wheat to take to the mill in Millhaven for grinding. The miller, a shrewd woman named Constance, inspected the grain with a critical eye and offered a fair price without comment on Kara's presence. It was the first transaction Samuel had completed as a landowner, and he felt a rush of pride as he pocketed the coins. "We did well," he said as they drove the empty wagon back toward the homestead, the late afternoon sun warm on their faces. "Better than I hoped." "The autumn planting will determine next year's success," Kara said, but she was smiling, a rare, full smile that showed her tusks and made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "We should plant more of the south field in barley. It handles the wet better than wheat." "Then barley it is." Samuel found himself smiling back, caught up in her enthusiasm. "You know, I think we make a good team." "I think so too." They were nearly home when they saw the smoke. It rose in a thick black column from the direction of the homestead, visible for miles against the clear sky. Samuel felt his heart drop into his stomach. He snapped the reins, urging the horses into a gallop, and Kara gripped the seat beside him, her knuckles white. They rounded the bend and saw the barn engulfed in flames, the old wood burning like kindling. The cows were screaming, trapped inside, and smoke poured from the open door in choking waves. Samuel barely had the wagon stopped before Kara leaped from the seat and ran toward the inferno. "Kara, no!" Samuel shouted, but she was already at the barn door, her arm thrown up to shield her face from the heat. She disappeared into the smoke, and Samuel felt terror like he had never known. He jumped from the wagon and ran after her, but the heat drove him back, searing his lungs with every breath. Then Kara emerged, leading Daisy by a rope, the cow's eyes rolling with panic. She shoved the rope into Samuel's hands and turned back toward the barn. "Get her away from here," she shouted and vanished into the smoke again. Samuel led Daisy to safety and tied her to a fence post, then ran back as Kara emerged with Clover. Her face was streaked with soot, her clothes smoking, and she was coughing so hard she could barely stand. But she turned back toward the barn a third time, and Samuel grabbed her arm. "You cannot go back in there. The roof is going to collapse. Buttercup is still inside." Kara tried to pull free, her strength formidable, but Samuel held on. "You will die if you go back in there." "I will not leave her." Kara's voice was raw, desperate. She broke his grip and ran back into the barn, and Samuel, without thinking, ran in after her. The smoke was so thick he could not see more than a few feet ahead. The heat was unbearable, blistering his exposed skin. He heard Kara coughing somewhere to his left and stumbled toward the sound. He found her trying to drag Buttercup toward the door, but the cow had collapsed, too terrified to move. Samuel grabbed the other side of the rope, and together they hauled the animal to her feet and half dragged, half carried her toward the door. They burst out into the open air just as the barn's roof gave way with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the sky. Samuel and Kara collapsed onto the grass, coughing and gasping, while Buttercup staggered away to join her companions. For several minutes they could do nothing but breathe, their lungs burning, their eyes streaming. Finally, Samuel sat up and looked at the barn. It was a total loss, the flames consuming what was left of the structure with savage efficiency. "What happened?" he croaked. "How did it start?" "I do not know." Kara's voice was barely a whisper. "We banked the forge coals this morning. There was nothing that should have caught fire." They sat in silence, watching their barn burn to ash, and Samuel felt the weight of the loss settle over him. The structure could be rebuilt, but it would cost money they had just begun to earn, time they could not afford to lose before winter. And underneath, the practical concerns was a deeper unease. Barns did not just catch fire for no reason. As the flames began to die down, Samuel saw movement at the edge of the property. 3 figures on horseback, watching from the road. They were too far away to identify, but something about the way they sat, the stillness of their observation, made his blood run cold. Then, as one, they turned and rode away, disappearing into the dusk. "Did you see that?" he asked Kara. "I saw." Her expression was grim. "Someone did this deliberately. They spent that night in the cottage, taking turns keeping watch in case the arsonists returned." Kara insisted that Samuel sleep first, and he was too exhausted to argue. He collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into uneasy dreams of smoke and fire. He woke to find Kara sitting at the window, her silhouette outlined by the pre-dawn light. The collar around her neck seemed darker than usual, a band of shadow, and Samuel was seized by a sudden, fierce determination to remove it, to free her from that last symbol of her bondage. "Your turn to rest," he said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "I will keep watch." Kara turned to look at him, and he saw that her eyes were red, though whether from smoke or tears he could not tell. "I am sorry, Samuel. This is my fault." "How is this your fault? People do not want an orc here. They would rather see the land go to waste than see it worked by someone like me." Her voice was bitter. "You should send me away. It would be easier for you." "Easier is not always better." Samuel stood and crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. "I am not sending you away. We will figure out who did this, and we will make sure it does not happen again. Together." "You could have died today," Kara said, and now the tears did spill over, tracking clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. "You ran into a burning building for a cow. You could have died, and it would have been because of me." "I ran into a burning building because you did," Samuel said. "Because I could not stand the thought of losing you, not to fire, not to anything." Kara stared at him, her breath catching. "Samuel, I know this is not the right time," he interrupted. "I know we have 100 problems to solve and I should be focused on practical things. But I need you to know that you are not just my partner in farming. You are my friend, and you are important to me in ways that have nothing to do with work or land or any of that." "You are important to me too," Kara whispered. "So important it scares me." They stayed like that, kneeling together in the morning light, and Samuel felt the distance between them collapse into something intimate and fragile. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Her skin was warm under his hands, and he felt her lean into the touch, her eyes closing. Then the moment broke as roosters began to crow, heralding the full arrival of dawn, and they pulled apart, both suddenly aware of the work that lay ahead. The cows needed milking, the chickens needed feeding, and they needed to start planning how to rebuild the barn before winter arrived. Over the next week, they worked to clear the ruins of the barn and salvage what they could. The forge was intact, protected by its stone housing, and some of the tools had survived. Samuel used part of their harvest money to purchase lumber from a mill in the next county, and they began the slow process of rebuilding. Word of the fire had spread, and opinions in Millhaven were divided. Some people expressed sympathy and offered help. The miller, Constance, sent her teenage son to assist with the rebuilding, and a few farmers donated nails and hardware. But others were less kind. Samuel overheard rumors in the market that the fire was divine judgment for harboring an orc, that he was a fool for not selling Kara off when he had the chance. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the fire when Samuel found a crude message painted on the cottage door. "Orc lover, leave or burn." Kara saw it before he could scrub it away, and he watched her face shutter closed, all the progress they had made in bringing her out of her shell vanishing in an instant. She said nothing, just turned and walked to where they had been framing the new barn and threw herself into the work with a ferocity that worried him. That evening, as they sat at the table with the file and the collar, Samuel broke the silence that had stretched between them all day. "I am going to find out who is doing this." "It does not matter who," Kara said dully. "It could be anyone. It could be everyone. It matters to me." He set down the file and reached across the table to take her hand. "Kara, look at me, please." She did, reluctantly, and he saw the defeat in her eyes, the resignation that had been there the first day he arrived. It made him angry not at her, but at the world that had beaten her down so thoroughly. "You belong here," he said firmly. "This is your home as much as it is mine. More even, since you have been here longer. I am not going to let ignorant people drive you away." "But at what cost?" Kara's fingers tightened around his. "They burned the barn. What will they burn next? The house? The fields? How much are you willing to lose for me? As much as it takes." The words came out fierce, almost a vow. "I am not giving up on this, and I am not giving up on you." Kara's breath hitched and fresh tears spilled over. "Why? Why do you care so much?" "Because somewhere along the way, between the milking and the harvests and the filing at this table every night, I fell in love with you." Samuel said it simply, without fanfare, and watched her eyes go wide. "I love your strength and your patience. I love the way you know every inch of this land. I love how you ran into a burning building to save a cow. I love you, Kara, and I am not going to stand by and let anyone hurt you." Samuel. His name was a broken sound, half sob, half laugh. "I love you too. I have loved you since the day you signed that deed. I tried not to. I tried to tell myself it was impossible, that you could never feel the same way about an orc, but I do not love an orc," Samuel interrupted gently. "I love you, Kara. The person who laughs at my terrible jokes and teaches me about crops and sits with me every evening while I file away at that damned collar. I love you." Kara surged to her feet, rounding the table, and pulled him up into an embrace that lifted him off his feet. She was strong, her arms like iron bands, and Samuel wrapped his own arms around her and held on, feeling her shake with sobs against his shoulder. He murmured wordless comfort and stroked her hair, and they stood like that until the lamp began to gutter, and the night grew deep around them. When Kara finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen, but she was smiling, really smiling, joy breaking through the grief like sun through clouds. "I never thought I would hear those words, never thought I deserved to hear them." "You deserve them and more," Samuel said. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the strong line of her jaw, the curve of her tusks. "You deserve everything good in this world." Kara leaned down. She was slightly taller than him and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of intimacy that made his heart clench. "I do not need everything, just this, just you." They stood like that, breathing the same air, until Samuel finally stepped back and picked up the file from the table. "Let me work on this a while longer. I think I am close to breaking through." Kara settled back into her chair, and he resumed his place across from her, the file rasping against the iron in a rhythm that had become as familiar as a heartbeat. They talked while he worked, about plans for the farm, about what crops to plant in the spring, about whether they should get a dog to help with security. The conversation was mundane, but underneath, it ran a current of joy, the knowledge that they had finally spoken the truth that had been growing between them for weeks. Near midnight, Samuel felt the rivet give way. The file broke through the last bit of metal, and the collar fell open with a soft click. Kara gasped, her hand flying to her throat, and Samuel carefully pried the iron band away and set it on the table between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Kara reached up and touched her bare neck, her fingers exploring the skin that had been hidden for 6 years. There were scars there, pale green lines where the metal had rubbed, and she traced them with something like wonder. "It is off," she whispered. "It is really off." "You are free," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Truly free." Kara looked at him, and there were tears on her face again, but these were different tears of relief, of release. She stood and pulled him to his feet, then into another embrace, this one gentler but no less intense. "Thank you," she said against his ear. "Thank you for everything, for freeing me, for believing in me, for loving me." "Always," Samuel promised, and kissed her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. Kara made a small sound and turned her head, and then they were kissing properly, her tusks pressing against his skin, her lips warm and soft. It was awkward at first, an unfamiliar geometry, but they learned each other quickly, and the kiss deepened into something that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Kara was laughing, her forehead pressed to his. "I have never done that before." "Neither have I, not like that." Samuel grinned, giddy and reckless with happiness. "I think we will get better with practice." "I would like that," Kara said, and kissed him again and again, until they were both dizzy with it. They stayed up until dawn, talking and kissing and planning a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. Samuel proposed that they formalize their partnership, drawing up new papers that would list them as co-owners of the land. Kara suggested they host a harvest feast, inviting the few people who had shown them kindness as a way of building alliances in the community. They talked about the barn, about adding a loft for storage, about maybe getting a few pigs in the spring. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel looked at Kara, at her soot-stained clothes and her scarred neck and her bright, hopeful eyes, and felt a certainty settle into his bones. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The rebuilding of the barn took 3 weeks, with Samuel and Kara working alongside Constance's son, a quiet young man named Thomas who proved surprisingly skilled with a hammer. On the final day, as they fitted the last roof beam into place, Samuel saw riders approaching on the road. His stomach tightened, remembering the figures who had watched the barn burn, but these riders were different women in leather armor, carrying spears with green skin and braided hair. Orcs. Kara saw them at the same moment and went very still, her hand tightening on the beam she was holding. "My clan," she said quietly, "or what is left of it." There were 5 of them, and they dismounted at the edge of the property with the wary caution of soldiers entering uncertain territory. The leader was a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair and a scar that bisected her left cheek. She looked at Kara with an expression Samuel could not read. "Kara," the woman said, her voice like gravel. "I am Thora. I was war leader under your mother." Kara climbed down from the barn framework slowly, and Samuel followed, positioning himself at her side. She did not acknowledge him, her entire focus on the orcs. "My mother is dead then. 2 years now. She spoke your name before she passed, said she had been wrong to cast you out." Thora's gaze flicked to the new barn, to the cottage, to Samuel. "We heard rumors that an orc was living free in this region. I came to see if it was true." "It is true," Kara said, and her hand found Samuel's, their fingers lacing together. "I was indentured here, but I am free now. This is my home." Thora's gaze dropped to their joined hands, and something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or disapproval. "You have taken a human as a mate." "I have." Kara lifted her chin, defiant. "His name is Samuel Thornton, and he is a good man. He freed me when he did not have to. He treats me as an equal. I love him." The silence that followed was tense, the other orcs watching Thora for her reaction. Finally, the war leader nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud. She regretted casting you out, regretted it until the day she died. "That does not bring back the years I lost," Kara said, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. "Why are you here, Thora? What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I came to offer you a place in the clan if you want it. We are rebuilding, trying to forge a new path that does not involve constant war with the humans. We could use someone who understands both worlds." Thora glanced at Samuel again. "Both of you, if he is willing." Samuel felt Kara's hand tighten around his, felt her gaze on his face. He looked at her, saw the question in her eyes, and shook his head slightly. "Thank you for the offer," he said to Thora, "but our home is here. We have built something good and we are not ready to leave it." "We are not," Kara echoed, and there was relief in her voice. "But I would like to know my clan again. To visit, perhaps, and trade news. That can be arranged." Thora smiled, a fierce expression that made her look younger. "You have my word, Kara of the Green Valley clan, that you are welcome among us whenever you wish to come, and your mate as well." The orcs stayed for a meal, sharing news of the clan and the wider world beyond the homestead. Samuel learned that the war that had led to Kara's capture had ended 3 years prior, replaced by an uneasy peace that was slowly solidifying into genuine cooperation in some regions. Thora spoke of trade agreements and shared hunting grounds, of humans and orcs working together to settle the frontier. "The world is changing," she said, accepting a second helping of the stew Kara had made. "Not everyone is happy about it, but change comes whether we want it or not." "We have seen some of that resistance," Samuel said, thinking of the burned barn and the painted threats. "Not everyone is ready to accept orcs as equals." "And not all orcs are ready to accept humans," Thora replied. "But people like you two, living your lives and proving it, can work that matters. You are the future, whether you realize it or not." After the orcs left, riding back north toward the mountains, Samuel and Kara stood together in the yard, watching the sun set over their newly rebuilt barn. Kara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me on, all the trouble it has caused?" "Not for a single moment," Samuel said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "You are ridiculous," Kara said, but she was smiling, "and I love you for it." The threats did not stop immediately, but they became less frequent as autumn deepened into winter. Samuel made a point of being visible in Millhaven, of conducting his business with quiet dignity and refusing to be intimidated. Kara came with him sometimes, and while they received stares and occasional muttered comments, no one confronted them directly. The turning point came in late October when an early frost threatened to destroy the last of the vegetable harvest. Samuel and Kara worked through the night to cover the plants, and when dawn came, they found their nearest neighbor, a dour man named Gregory, who had never spoken to them, before standing at the edge of the property with blankets and burlap sacks. "Thought you might need these," Gregory said gruffly, not quite meeting their eyes. "Frost takes everyone's crops, orc or human." "Thank you," Samuel said, accepting the materials. "We appreciate it." Gregory nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "That barn you built, it is good work." "Better than the old one." "Kara designed it," Samuel said. "She knows what she is doing." Gregory glanced at Kara, his expression unreadable, then nodded again and walked away. It was not friendship, but it was acknowledgement, and that felt like progress. Winter settled over the homestead with snow and ice and long, dark nights spent huddled by the fire. Samuel and Kara fell into an easy domesticity, taking turns cooking and mending and caring for the animals. In the evenings, they would sit together on the old sofa Samuel had repaired, Kara reading aloud from a book of poetry the traveling priest had given her years ago, Samuel working on small repairs or whittling figures from scrap wood. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Samuel pulled a small carved box from his pocket and handed it to Kara. "I made this for you." Kara opened it carefully and found inside a ring carved from a piece of the barn's old oak beams, sanded smooth and polished to a soft sheen. She looked at Samuel, her eyes wide. "I know orcs do not marry the way humans do," Samuel said, suddenly nervous, "but I wanted to give you something, a symbol, to show that I am committed to you, to this life we are building together." Kara pulled the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Samuel Thornton," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "are you asking me to be your wife?" "I am asking you to be my partner in all things," Samuel said. "My co-owner of this land, my equal in every way, and yes, my wife, if you will have me." "Yes," Kara said, and laughed and kissed him hard enough to knock him backward on the sofa. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married on the winter solstice in a quiet ceremony in the cottage, with Constance and her son as witnesses. There was no priest. Samuel doubted they could find one willing to perform a marriage between a human and an orc, so they wrote their own vows and spoke them by firelight, promising to love and support each other through whatever came. Kara wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue linen Samuel had bought in Millhaven, and she had woven winter flowers into her braid. Samuel wore his best shirt and trousers, and he had polished his boots until they gleamed. They exchanged rings. Kara had carved one for Samuel from the same oak wood, and sealed their vows with a kiss that made Constance's son blush and look away. After the ceremony, they shared a meal of roast chicken and root vegetables, and Constance proposed a toast. "To Samuel and Kara," she said, raising her cup, "may your love prove stronger than prejudice, and may your fields always yield bounty." "Hear, hear," her son added, and they all drank. That night, after their guests had gone home, Samuel and Kara lay together in the bed they now officially shared, wrapped in quilts against the winter cold. Kara traced the ring on Samuel's finger, her touch gentle. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "A home, a partner, a future. For so long I was just surviving day by day. Now I feel like I am truly living." "We are living," Samuel corrected, pulling her closer. "Together. And we are going to keep living, keep building until this place is everything we dreamed it could be." "What do we dream it could be?" Kara asked, a smile in her voice. "A home," Samuel said. "Not just for us, but for anyone who needs one. A place where the fact that you are an orc or I am human does not matter. Where people are judged by their character, not their species. That is a big dream." "Then we had better get started." Samuel kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "We have the rest of our lives, after all." Spring came with thawing snow and the return of green to the fields. Samuel and Kara planted the barley in the south field as planned, along with oats and a new crop of wheat. They bought 3 piglets from a farmer 2 counties over, and Kara built them a pen near the barn with her own hands. The chickens began laying again, and the cows produced enough milk that they could start making cheese to sell at market. In late April, Thora returned with a small delegation from the clan. They brought gifts, furs, and smoked meat, and a set of beautifully crafted knives, and news that the clan council had voted to establish a formal trading relationship with Millhaven. Samuel and Kara were asked to act as intermediaries, to help facilitate communication and build trust between the two communities. It was challenging work. There were misunderstandings and setbacks, moments when it seemed like old prejudices would sabotage any hope of cooperation. But slowly, carefully, progress was made. The orcs provided skilled labor and unique goods. Leather worked with techniques humans had never seen, herbs and medicines from the mountains, finely wrought metalwork. In exchange, they received grain and livestock, tools, and textiles. Samuel and Kara's homestead became a meeting point, a neutral ground where humans and orcs could interact without the weight of history pressing down quite so heavily. They hosted gatherings and dinners, mediating disputes and celebrating successes. It was exhausting and rewarding in equal measure, and through it all, they leaned on each other, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. In the summer, Kara discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after they had finished the day's work, the two of them sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the fields they had planted together. "I am with child," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Samuel felt the world tilt. "You are sure?" "I am sure. The healer from the clan confirmed it when she was here last week." Kara looked at him, her expression uncertain. "I know we have not talked about this. I know it is complicated. A child who is half human, half orc, will be loved," Samuel interrupted, taking her hand. "Completely and unconditionally loved, by both of us." Kara's eyes filled with tears and she laughed shakily. "I am terrified. I do not know how to be a mother. What if I do it wrong?" "Then we will figure it out together," Samuel said, "the same way we have figured out everything else." He slid off the bench and knelt in front of her, his hands cradling her face. "This is a gift, Kara, a miracle. We are going to have a family." "A family," Kara repeated as though testing the word. Then she smiled, that brilliant, tusked smile he loved so much. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Kara's belly grew, so did the preparations for the baby. They converted the small storage room off the bedroom into a nursery, and Kara sewed blankets and tiny clothes while Samuel built a cradle from oak wood. Friends from both the human and orc communities brought gifts: a rattle carved from bone, a soft toy made from rabbit fur, a set of miniature boots that made Kara cry with their absurdity and sweetness. In late winter, on a night when snow fell soft and silent outside, Kara went into labor. The clan healer, a stern woman named Greta, arrived to assist, and she sent Samuel from the room with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. He paced the main room of the cottage, listening to Kara's labored breathing and occasional cries, feeling utterly helpless. It was near dawn when he heard the baby's first wail, strong and indignant. Greta emerged from the bedroom, wiping her hands on a cloth, and nodded to him. "You have a daughter. Both she and Kara are healthy." Samuel did not remember crossing the room, but suddenly he was at the bedside, looking down at Kara cradling a tiny, squirming bundle. The baby had green skin a shade lighter than her mother's, a wisp of dark hair, and when she yawned, he could see the tiny buds of tusks just beginning to form. "She is perfect," he breathed, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers closed around his thumb, gripping with surprising strength, and Samuel felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it stole his breath. "What should we name her?" Kara asked, her voice hoarse but happy. Samuel thought of his mother, of the strength and grace she had shown in the face of prejudice, of the kindness she had tried to instill in him. "Margaret," he said, "after my mother, if that is all right with you." "Margaret," Kara repeated softly, looking down at their daughter. "Margaret Thornton, I like it." Margaret grew quickly, a bright and curious child who toddled after her parents as they worked the fields and charmed everyone she met with her gap-toothed smile. She had her mother's strength and her father's stubbornness, and she was utterly fearless, climbing trees and chasing chickens and demanding stories from anyone who would sit still long enough. By the time she was 3, the homestead had expanded. Samuel and Kara had purchased the adjacent property from a retiring farmer, doubling their acreage. They had hired 2 permanent workers, 1 human. One orc, and the farm was prospering beyond anything Samuel had dared to hope for when he first arrived, with nothing but a deed and a determination to do right. On a warm summer evening, Samuel and Kara sat on the porch watching Margaret play with the farm's new dog, a shaggy mutt who tolerated the toddler's enthusiastic affection with patient dignity. The fields stretched out before them, golden with ripening wheat, and the air was sweet with the scent of growing things. "You remember the day we met?" Kara asked, leaning her head on Samuel's shoulder. "I remember thinking you were going to hit me with that axe," Samuel said, and felt her laugh against him. "I considered it. You were a stranger, and I had learned not to trust those." She took his hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I am glad I gave you a chance. I am glad you did too." Samuel watched Margaret chase the dog in circles, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. "I am glad for all of it. The struggles, the fear, the moments when we did not know if we would make it. It was all worth it to get here." "To get here," Kara echoed and kissed him soft and sweet. "To this life, to our family, to our home." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Samuel felt a contentment he had never known before. The world was still imperfect, still full of prejudice and pain, but here, on this small piece of land, they had built something good. They had proven that love could bridge the divide between species, that kindness could change hearts, that freedom was a right worth fighting for. And as Margaret ran to them, her small hands sticky with jam from the kitchen, her eyes bright with joy, Samuel knew that this family, this home, this life they had built together was worth more than all the land or gold in the world. "Papa, Mama, come see." Margaret tugged at their hands. "The fireflies are dancing." They let her pull them down into the yard and stood together under the emerging stars, watching fireflies drift and glow among the wheat stalks like tiny fallen stars. Margaret danced with them, spinning and laughing, and Samuel and Kara held each other close, their hearts full of love and gratitude and hope for all the years to come. The deed that had brought them together lay forgotten in a drawer somewhere inside the cottage, its words about property and ownership rendered meaningless by the life they had chosen instead. What mattered now was not what was written on parchment, but what they had written together in the soil and the seasons, in the home they had built and the family they had created. They had started with nothing but a chance encounter and a choice to do what was right. And from that beginning, they had built a future bright with possibility, a love that transcended every boundary, and a happiness that would last the rest of their days. As the night deepened and Margaret finally tired, Samuel carried his daughter inside and tucked her into bed, brushing a kiss across her forehead. Kara stood in the doorway, watching them with eyes full of tenderness, and when he joined her, she took his hand and led him to their own room. "I love you," she whispered as they settled into bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "I love you too," Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Always and forever." And in the quiet of that night, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had found, they slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, and they would face all of it together, as they always had, as they always would, partners in every sense of the word, bound not by chains or documents, but by a love that had transformed them both and given them a home worth cherishing, a family worth protecting, and a future worth believing in. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by harvests and seasons, by Margaret's growth and the growth of their community. More families, both human and orc, settled in the region, drawn by the example Samuel and Kara had set. The homestead became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict, Samuel watched his daughter grow into a strong, confident young woman who moved easily between both cultures, belonging fully to neither, and yet accepted by both. She had her mother's gift for farming and her father's head for business, and by the time she was 16, she was running significant portions of the operation herself. Kara aged gracefully, her strength barely diminished by the passing years, though silver began to thread through her black hair. She became an elder in the reformed Orc clan, advising on matters of trade and diplomacy, her voice respected by humans and orcs alike. The girl who had once worn an iron collar and believed she had no future became a leader, a bridge builder, a symbol of resilience and hope. Samuel's hair went gray, and his back ached on cold mornings, but he could not imagine a better life than the one he had stumbled into that day. He arrived at the homestead with nothing but a deed and a determination to do right. He had gained so much more than land. He had gained purpose, family, and a love that had sustained him through every hardship. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together in the same spot where Samuel had first seen Kara chopping wood, and they renewed the vows they had spoken 2 decades before. Their friends and neighbors gathered to witness it, humans and orcs standing side by side, their children playing together without the burden of old hatreds. 20 years, Kara said, her hand in Samuel's as they stood before the assembled crowd. 20 years since you walked into my life and changed everything. You freed me, Samuel Thornton, in ways I did not even know I needed to be freed. You taught me that I was worthy of love, of respect, of a future. You gave me a home and a family and a life I treasure more than I can express. Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. You saved me too, Kara. You showed me what real strength looks like, what courage means. You turned a piece of land into a home, and you turned a lonely man into a husband and father. I am who I am because of you. They kissed as their friends cheered, and Margaret, now a young woman with her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes, stood with tears streaming down her face, proud and happy for the parents who had given her such a strong foundation. The celebration lasted into the night, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Samuel and Kara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, but eventually they slipped away to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. 20 years, Samuel said, echoing Kara's earlier words. It feels like yesterday and like a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean. Kara leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the fields that glowed silver in the moonlight. Sometimes I still dream that I am wearing the collar, that none of this is real. Then I wake up and feel your arms around me, and I know it is true. Samuel moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. It is real, all of it, and it is ours. Ours, Kara agreed, covering his hands with her own. What a beautiful word that is. They stood like that for a long time, comfortable in the silence, watching the night deepen around them. Inside the cottage they could hear Margaret laughing with friends, the sound bright and carefree. The fields whispered in the breeze, the animals settled in the barn, and the world felt at peace. You have any regrets? Kara asked eventually. Anything you wish you had done differently? Samuel considered the question carefully. No, he said finally. I wish the journey had been easier sometimes, that we had not faced so much opposition. But the difficulties made us stronger. They taught us what we were capable of. I would not trade a single moment of our life together, even the hard parts. Neither would I. Kara turned in his arms to face him, her amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. You are my home, Samuel, not this land, not the cottage or the barn or the fields. You, wherever you are, that is where I belong. Then we belong to each other, Samuel said, pulling her close. Now and always. They kissed, a gentle affirmation of promises kept and love enduring, and when they finally went inside to rejoin their guests, they did so hand in hand, partners in every way that mattered, bound by choice and strengthened by trials, living proof that love could overcome any obstacle and that freedom, once truly given, could transform lives in ways both miraculous and profound. The story of Samuel Thornton and Cara of the Green Valley clan became legend in the region, told and retold to children as an example of what was possible when people chose compassion over cruelty, when they saw each other as individuals rather than representatives of warring groups. Their homestead stood for generations, a testament to the life they had built, and their descendants carried forward the values they had lived by: equality, kindness, hard work, and above all, love. And though the deed that had brought them together was eventually lost to time, crumbling to dust in some forgotten drawer, what it had set in motion lived on, a ripple of change that spread far beyond one small farm in the frontier, touching lives and changing hearts, proving that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to see them, truly see them, and choose to set them free.